Afternoon, everyone. Hope you've all been networking, exchanging contact details. Not in that way, though. You know, they're saying LinkedIn's becoming the new Tinder. But anyways, look, we're getting into our next session, which is hosted by Morgan Stanley on taking your career to the next level. So can we please have a round of applause as we introduce the next panelist, please? That's Jordon Clarke, Chantel Nyarko, Ian Wadera, Kume Fese, and Taiwo Abiola on the stage. Please, thank you very much. Take it away, guys.
My name is Jordon Clarke. I'm an executive director at Morgan Stanley, and I am responsible for the global projects team within GCM. So, I have a secret to tell you. This is my second week back in the office after taking 16 weeks off for paternity leave. So while spending time with my wife and my 9-month-old daughter was incredible, and probably the best benefit that Morgan Stanley have to offer, this is my first speaking engagement in a little while. So I apologize if I'm a little bit rusty. Last week I could just about remember my password to log in, so forgive me for any baby brain moments. Another hat that I wear at Morgan Stanley is the co-chair of the Afro-Caribbean Business Alliance. And with that, I have insight into the firm's DE&I strategy. And I can honestly say that as a firm, we are committed to the retention, the attraction, and the development of Black heritage professionals. One way in which we've demonstrated this is our continued partnership with BYP. So we're proud to be a sponsor here today, but historically, we've had some of our very senior Black leaders such as Mandel Crawley, Carla Harris, Izzy Amunde, speak. But today, we're going to hear from some of our rising stars. And quite often in environments like this, I see people make a beeline to the most senior person in the room. But what they fail to understand is that it's your peer group that are really in the trenches with you. It's your peer group that understands your career aspirations and are going through the similar challenges that you are. And so that's why today we're going to discuss what strategies our panel took in order to reach this point of their career today, but also prepare themselves for future success. Which ties in quite nicely with the theme of today, being intentional about your career. So, I'm now able to sit down as we introduce the panel. So, Chantel, you can start.
Thank you. Hi, everybody. My name is Chantel Nyarko. I'm a director within our diversity and inclusion team at Morgan Stanley. I am about 2 weeks away from celebrating my 7-year anniversary at Morgan Stanley. Alongside this, I also sit on the steering committee of our African and Caribbean Business Alliance under Jordan's leadership, and also our Black Professionals Forum, which I will touch on a little bit later.
Hi, everyone. Can you hear me? I'm Taiwo Abiola, and I sit on the Morgan Stanley Inclusive Ventures Lab team, and we are an in-house startup accelerator for underrepresented founders, and we define that as female or ethnic minorities. Our aim is really to promote financial inclusion, and we do that by providing capital, content, community, and connections for these companies to help them drive and accelerate their business growth. I've been at Morgan Stanley for just over a year now.
Yes. Hello everyone, my name is Kume Fese, and I've been at Morgan Stanley for just over 9 years now, and I currently work in the Bank Resource Management Division as a business unit risk manager. So just like Chantel, I'm also on the steering committee of the Afro-Caribbean Business Alliance under Jordan's tutelage, and as well on the steering committee of the Black Professionals Forum, just as well.
Cool. Hi everyone, my name is Ian Wadera. I am an associate in the Global Capital Markets team at Morgan Stanley. I have been there just over a year as well. Currently enjoying it, and I will talk to you a bit later on my path and how I joined Morgan Stanley, because I wasn't traditionally a banker. Thank you.
See, I was not joking at all when I said we've got rising stars on the panel. And I know each and every single person on the panel very well. And whilst this might not be full Chatham House rules, we're trying to recreate the conversations that we have when we bump into each other in the hallways or the lifts, and have those moments where you need that slight bit of career inspiration or guidance. So I have a few questions that I would love to ask, but I will make sure I leave at least 10 minutes at the end for questions from the audience. And Ian, I'm going to pick on you first. So at Morgan Stanley, we always speak about the importance of owning your career. So that's not to downplay the importance of a manager, but it's to highlight the fact that we need to be deliberate in our decisions and accountable for our actions in order to progress. So with the theme of today being intentional steps, can you give an example of when you've had to be intentional in order to progress within your career?
Cool. Thanks. Okay, and I guess, yeah, let's straight off the bat. I kind of finished my degree in actuarial science, and I qualified as an actuary a few years ago, and upon which I was kind of questioning what next with my career. I wanted to be involved in something very commercial. I wanted to involve something more client-facing, a bit more fast-paced. And not to say I didn't enjoy it, I really enjoyed my career as an actuary, but I was always curious about the investment banking world. And what so happened, it's in kind of the conversation that you were having earlier, saying, look, the people who will most likely help you tend to be your peers. And I just happened to mention to my friend, and I was like, I'm in a weird point in my career where I'm thinking about what else. And he said, well, it's funny you should say that because I know someone who just moved from consulting to investment banking through Morgan Stanley, and they have this program, it's called the Morgan Stanley Experience Professional Program. And I was like, well, that's curious, but then I was like, well, the shame is they've closed applications and they'll only open them next year if so. So, you know, you kind of put that away and you don't think about it until months later, and your friend says, look, applications are open. If you really want to go for it, I think you should apply. That time I'm on board a flight to go away on holiday, and I'm like, I'm not doing that. And it's only when I came back on the last day of the applications, and I'm thinking, well, it's a Sunday afternoon, I've got to go back to work tomorrow. Wait a minute, there's an application, can I put it in? And I submitted it, and it was like a bit like put the CV together, put everything together, and I submitted it. And the point from kind of applying to by the time you get the job offer, there was a lot of thought going into actually, do I want to do this? Is this the right thing? Is this the right move? And each time, at each stage where you meet the people in your teams and you meet the people who you're going to be working with, my decision was affirmed. And it was a question of, well, what's your day-to-day like? And it's something simple. And I was like, oh, I resonate with that. I want to be involved in things like that. And so far, a year in, and it's been that, right? It's been that a lot more, and also a lot more about what they say in investment banking.
Good.
Yeah.
And it's really interesting as well, because quite often people have this misconception that you need to study finance or accounting to enter the world of banking or be working at a competitor firm. But the MSEPP program actually opens that horizon to anybody from various different backgrounds. And look, we work on the same floor, and I know you've not come from a traditional finance background, but your skill set is just as applicable.
Yeah, and I think, yeah, it's going through, it depends on what stage you are in your career, where you want to kind of be, but it's going through your experiences so far and reflecting, right? It's sitting down with your CV and saying, well, I did this, but reflecting, what does that mean? What did I actually learn? And then when you do then go to an interview with something totally different, because that's the world you want to pursue, you're able to speak more to that, right? Mm-hmm. I remember, being worried that some of the more technical stuff that I'd done as an actuary couldn't translate. But really, that's not it. The thing is solving problems, right? Yeah. I'm able to take a problem, break it down, and then communicate that. And if you can experience that or kind of show that to somebody,
yeah,
then it's a better argument.
It's very true. And I think that's a good example of mobility externally into the firm, but there's also opportunities for mobility internally. So Kume and I used to be in the same department, but you've now moved to BRM. So clearly that had to be an intentional move.
Yeah, I mean, I'm going to sort of explain a little bit about that, just for people to understand. But actually, Jordon was one of the people that I did discuss with at the point when I wanted to make that sort of move, and he gave me some helpful advice from his point of view as well. But generally speaking, within Morgan Stanley, I think there is a massive sort of support around internal mobility, and just evidenced by the fact when I joined on the grad program within the operations division, and that was, of course, for personal reasons. I wanted to sort of understand how again, without a banking background or studying finance at university. I have a background in engineering. So I really wanted to understand it from that point of view, and enjoyed my time in operations. I made sort of really good advancements within my career. But I thought, okay, at one point I wanted to decide what next, right? It's very, very similar to yourself, Ian. And I thought a different part of the firm, because I'm not here to sort of overly promote Morgan Stanley, but of course I am an ambassador, so I will say I didn't want to leave the firm. That's the honest truth. So I was trying to discover other parts of the firm where I could sort of lend my skill sets and my talents and things like that. So I looked to move into the business. And with that process, I think a lot of people just need to realize that patience is a real big part of the game and the overall picture. I'm a big believer things happen when they're supposed to happen, and they happen for a reason. So going through that process, COVID happened, and that sort of set me back in my mind for a little bit of time. But you continue with the sort of building your network aspect of things, focusing on people that you believe are sort of in your corner and can provide you with sensible advice to make such big, career moves. And yeah, it happened about 2 years ago, and yeah, still another part of the firm to explore. So yeah, I think knowing both sides, externally and internally, is just a nice big picture for that.
And you can also grow within your role. So, Ty, have you had any experiences similar to that?
Yeah, absolutely. So like Jordan touched on, I also don't have a finance background. I studied French and Spanish at university for context. And so, like I said, my team supports startup companies. And whenever we were looking at like the financials of the companies, I didn't understand what they were talking about. I felt very almost useless, like you can't contribute to something that you don't understand. And I personally didn't like that feeling. And I saw that as an opportunity where I could develop skills. And I spoke to my manager and I said, I really want to understand when you guys are talking about financials, what can we do about this? I'd like some training. But that was intentional. If I hadn't said that, I would have very much just carried on in that role and just not doing the financials. But I personally wanted to understand that. And my team are also very supportive. Even if things don't necessarily translate to my day-to-day, my manager has always known that I'm very big on personal development. And so I did investment banking training this summer with the incoming investment banking graduate analyst, and that was honestly very challenging. The first week I was regretting my decision, I'm not gonna lie. But by the second, third week, fourth week in, I realized I was just as capable as everyone else in that room. I just didn't originally have a finance background, but there's absolutely nothing that you can't learn if you don't put your mind to it. If you do put your mind to it, sorry. So yeah, that was my example.
Good. So example of external kind of, that focus to be intentional about your career, internal across departments, but also in your existing role. And look, I say that obviously with my Morgan Stanley hat on, but that's applicable for whatever role you're in at the current situation now. One thing that I know I'm very conscious of is the saying, comparison is the thief of all joy, right? You try to run your own race, you try to be individual and work to your maximum potential, but it's so hard to not look around and compare yourself to your friends or try to set yourself this benchmark of, by a certain age, I need to be earning a certain amount. Or speaking to a room full of predominantly black people, the old adage of, yes, you must be a doctor or a lawyer, right?
Or engineer.
There we go. It's not YouTuber. So, that perception, that comparison, have any of you experienced that? And if so, how have you managed it?
Absolutely. I can take that one to start. So when I was in the training that I mentioned earlier, everybody was going into investment banking or something similar, and I was one of few who wasn't. And I almost felt like, am I making a bad decision? Why is it that these people are going into what they perceive to be a prestigious career and I just didn't want to do it? I almost felt like maybe I should think about what I'm doing. But actually I realized that I was picking a career that aligned to my lifestyle, and I think a lot of people do it the other way around. They pick a career and then allow that to dictate their lifestyle. But if you know that there's a certain lifestyle that you want to live, then you should think about picking a career based on that. So for example, market-based jobs, you're probably going to be expected in the office between 6 and 7 a.m. And if you can't imagine that, it's just wildly impossible for you, you should probably consider like other roles within the bank. Another thing as well is strengths and weaknesses. What are your own personal strengths and weaknesses? I knew that I couldn't be committed to investment banking in the way that these other guys could. I know that my strengths didn't lie there. And most importantly, when I network with people and I ask them about other roles, I always ask them what they dislike about the role. I think it's really hard to make a well-informed decision if you don't know the negatives. I think people will speak very highly of the roles generally, but for me, it's always important that I understand exactly why you don't like this role. And if someone tells you that there's nothing they don't like, they're absolutely lying. Every role has a con, and I think for me, I've always wanted to understand the pros and cons before I make a decision about my career. And lastly, I would say that at the end of the day, you're the one that's going to be doing the job at the desk for at least 8 hours a day, 5 days a week. And if you haven't picked it for yourself, you haven't put yourself at the forefront of every career decision you've made, it makes it really, really difficult to get up in the morning, motivate yourself to do that role.
Pick a lifestyle. That needs to be on a t-shirt somewhere. That's incredible. Any other thoughts?
Yeah, I completely echo what Ty just said. I think when I try and look at my career, I don't look at job titles. So for context, my background was in recruitment, and a lot of people would come to me and say, I want to be a trader. And my question back is, why do you want to be a trader? So I always try and break it down and think about the skills that you want to utilize, the activity that you want to be doing, and then work your way up from there rather than gravitating, like you say, towards, I want to be a banker because I've heard that's the right thing. Well, actually, if you want to work within something analytical, there's so many different things that you can do. So I think I always try and break it down in terms of what gives me joy in terms of doing that for 8, 9, sometimes 12 hours a day. What am I good at? Where do I need to develop? And what role is going to allow me that platform to do so? So rather than thinking of the job title, think of the activity and then work your way up from there.
Yeah, I want to add to that because I think one real message I just want to add to that is a lot of analysts or people that are coming in on the graduate program, you start with your graduate class, right? So you're in the same class with X amount of people, and as you're progressing through your career, there are certain key milestones. You know, the usual sort of, oh, it's going to take you 2 to 3 years to get to, you know, from analyst to associate, and then from associate to director, and so on, right? So everyone is sort of on track to want to be the quickest to do that. And Jordan hit the nail on the head there. Comparison is definitely the thief of joy, right? If you start overemphasizing and thinking too much about sort of that sort of period and thinking you should be either ahead or together with your peers, you're going to lose sight of your overall career picture because you're going to be absolutely focused on that. So my personal experience while I was in operations just before I left, I had a big decision to make in my head. It was either you sort of stay and you go through the promotion process to become a VP, knowing full well that if I move divisions, you're not entirely starting from scratch. Of course, you're taking transferable skills, but you are effectively needing to build up that confidence in the new team and new organization that you're moving into. It was a conscious decision. My mates, if you like to call them, you know, they all attained VP at sort of round about that same time. But I have a bigger picture, and what I said earlier about sort of, I believe in everything happens for a reason and when it's supposed to happen. That's what drives me personally, but I definitely think you should really focus about your overall career and not think too much about the next person.
You also miss your own achievements. If you're too focused on what other people are doing, you're missing the good things that you're doing, and then you miss the opportunity to self-promote and sort of flag the actually amazing work that you're achieving. Yeah. So I just wanted to add that to the point.
No, and you touched upon something crucial there, which was in your mobility opportunity, you're able to tap into your network. And for me, for the longest period of time, I found networking so unauthentic, and I felt like it was very forced. It took me a while, and I mean at least 2 or 3 years to get over that period and actually try to cultivate genuine relationships. And if you haven't already, I highly recommend the book by Carla Harris. It's about the power of networking. And she talks about the relationship currency that you can build by perhaps speaking with somebody, doing them a favor, and not with the intent of that favor comes back to you, but 99% of the time it will do. Now, networking is so important regardless of what field you're in, but Chantel, how did you go about networking? How do you go about not only maintaining those relationships, but also strengthening them?
Yeah, absolutely. I think building strong relationships is arguably more important than sort of getting your day job right sometimes, because you are hired on the basis of the fact that you can do the job right. You are good. So to get to that next level, you need to have those connections, you need to have those advocates for the rooms that you're not in, and you only do that through building strong relationships. And you touched upon it in your intro. I think many people try and shoot for the top and go straight to who is the most senior person that I can get on my side, and so you miss this whole sort of peer group and even individuals that are more junior to yourself that can advocate for you and sort of help you along the way. And I think it did, same with you, it took me a while to sort of realize that. I sort of came into my role when I was first in recruitment. It was very much a filler role. It was targets-based. It was do X, Y, and Z, and then you're done for the day. And I sort of thought executing on that role was fine, and then I was done. And then there were situations where I felt like I needed an advocate, and I figured, actually, I need to broaden my network. So one of the things that I used to do when I was in recruitment was anytime I hired an individual, I would then take them out for coffee after their 3-month period. Firstly, to get to understand what they did and give them an opportunity to talk about themselves, because who doesn't like talking about themselves, but understand exactly what they did, which strengthened my business knowledge, because I recruited for areas that, similar to Ty, I'm not a finance background, so I didn't really know too much about investment banking. So it added to my sort of knowledge set, but also meant that in the future, I had that relationship with those individuals, and I recruited for 5 years, so I hired quite a lot of people at the bank that I could tap into. For me, one of the biggest things actually in terms of building my network was joining a network. So many of your firms will have things like employee resource groups. So becoming part of ACBA broadened my sort of network beyond my day-to-day. I think a lot of people get fixated on, I'll network within my team or my department or whoever my stakeholders are that I need to do my job, but actually I realized that I needed to broaden it sort of much, much further. So I guess on a day-to-day basis, you and I wouldn't really cross paths, but I would say Jordon is one of my strongest connections at Morgan Stanley, and I would consider him as a mentor, and that came through because of networking. So joining those networks, joining activities, but the main thing is being present and active. I think it's all well and good to sort of sign up to a mailing list, turn up to one event a year, and then say, oh, I've ticked that one off, I can count these people as part of my network. You've got to keep showing up. You've got to put the time in. You've got to put the work in. And like you say, you kind of stole my section about Carla Harris, by the way. But it's about building that relationship currency and thinking about not what you can get back, but what you can also give, because it will just come back to you twofold whenever you need it. We have, at Morgan Stanley, we have a number of sort of charity initiatives as well, which allows you to expand beyond your team and beyond your division. So I think when you think about networking, I think go that step further. So I think about human resource management, my division that I'm in, but then who am I sort of touching from a client stakeholder relationship? What divisions do I interact with? So I try and pick some people there that I can be sort of networking, connecting with and building those relationships with. But one thing that I sort of had fed back to me is, like, I put some time in with a manager's diary because I wanted to sort of sit and have a conversation with them, but I didn't plan the meeting. And it almost felt like a wasted opportunity. So I would say if you're reaching out to people and trying to build those connections, make a plan for the meeting, understand exactly what you want to get out of it. If it is just to hear about their career journey, fine. If it is just to maybe understand their network and see where you can sort of benefit from there, fine. If it is sort of getting some career advice in terms of progression, fine, but just be very clear and intentional about what you want to get from them or potentially what you can provide for them. And then I would say the massive key is also following up. So one of my pet peeves when people reach out to me is having this conversation. I've given them tips, I've given them maybe names of people to network with, and then I never hear from them again. And I think it can be it's very disingenuous and almost a little bit rude if you don't sort of follow up and just make sure that that individual knows that you've taken what sort of the advice that they've given you to heart and you've gone and implemented it, especially if you're then going to potentially use them as part of like a 360 review, for example, at the end of the year. It sort of creates that rapport and builds that level of trust, that continuous trust that you need to actually sort of leverage what you need from that relationship.
That's such a complete answer. So many nuggets of knowledge. But for some reason, I was just focused on when you called me your mentor.
That shouldn't be a surprise to you.
I was. And look, for me, I know with mentors, I try to understand the difference between a mentor and a sponsor, right? A sponsor is a vocal advocate for you when you're not in the room, Whereas a mentor is someone that you'll go to with specific challenges. And I have several mentors. One might be to leverage their network. One might be for a technical aspect in terms of how I go about structuring a particular program of work. And the other might be for a totally different perspective. There's various different mentoring programs where you're either partnered with somebody of the same gender or the same ethnicity, which is excellent because you can identify on a level of common ground. But equally, some of the relationships that I found as beneficial have been totally different to me. White middle-class man who I can learn some of the unwritten nuances of the corporate world from, right? I can learn that from anybody without a doubt, but it has been helpful in terms of challenging some of the perceptions that I've had. So with that being said, Kume, Chantal, when thinking about finding your mentor, what is it that you're looking for? How do you, beyond networking, go into a much deeper relationship with your mentor?
Before I answer that, I just want to touch on something on the networking aspect, just very quickly.
Yeah, go for it.
So, interesting, I would say, story. When I was looking to move from operations, Chantal was actually the recruitment officer at the time for the business side of things. At the time, Chantal asked me that question, why do you want to move into this business? I couldn't quite explain it. And that's not for this role that I'm in right now. She had moved out of that area by the time I actually got to that point. But just clear evidence. Chantal and I are both here today, and I would actually consider Chantal a friend as well as part of my network. So it's just to give you sort of a bit more of a real life example of how that sort of stuff works. But sorry, on to the question about mentors. I think part of it is definitely born out of your network, right? So from people you classify as being part of your network, you start to identify individuals who you really sort of connect with on either one or a number of different levels. And from that, you sort of start building those relationships more naturally. For me, I don't have the capacity to fake a relationship with someone, especially not from a working aspect, because it's completely pointless from both sides, right? So it's more natural in the environment. So building and being part of networks such as ACBA, such as the BPF, and the divisions that you're in obviously help with that. So some of the people that I'll consider sort of my close mentors, one of the individuals, he's moved back to the US. He used to work within my group. But I'm using that as an example because this individual I connected with probably a couple of years before I moved into the role. He eventually was the one who reached out to me about the role being available. So I got the offer and moved in, and then for personal reasons, he had to leave the country and move back to the US. But since then, we've continued to maintain contact, and sort of, I'll say one key word in this entire sort of relationship is being intentional, right? Being intentional about what you want and being clear with your mentor about what it is that you want. That way, that creates the foundation of your relationship that you can definitely build on. So I think the key thing is being intentional, but finding these networks. We use the term because that's what everyone understands, but if you sort of dissociate the word network from that sort of overhanging, nervous feeling that you get from meeting new people, if you sort of disconnect those two, it becomes easier when you actually want to sort of build connections with people.
I promised that we would leave plenty of time for questions, but there are just a few more that I'd like to ask the panel, so you can go around very quickly. So, look, your career is ultimately, unfortunately, 40 years. So work-life balance, making sure you have the right wellness, making sure you're in the right mental health space is extremely important. So, Ian, from your perspective, you work quite intense hours, you've transitioned into banking. How do you try to strike that right balance?
Yeah, thanks. It's quite interesting because the panelists mentioned 8-hour days, and I was like, wait, what? Yeah, it's long. Yeah, and it was a big change, right? It was a big change because I was used to, I want to say more standard, but something where you have to commit. And it goes back to probably something that I'd like to share when someone shared this with me, and it made a lot more sense, which is the concept of identity capital, right? It's You can have, you can be born into wealth, you can be born into the right generation, right family, right era, right time. But the one thing that you can create yourself is identity capital. It's who do people think of, or what do people think of, or what do they say when you're not in the room? And that's the challenge of transitioning. It's not really trying to build so that people know you're there. It's trying to build yourself to a place where people feel that you're there. And one of the challenges I had was you're moving in not as an analyst or an intern. The MSCPP program allows you to lateral. They take credit for the experience that you've had, and you move into a different job, essentially, but at the same level or similar to. And the expectation is that you're skilled enough to catch up, right? And the expectation is after a while, you'll start adding the value that you were adding previously. And the reason I'm talking about identity capital is I don't want to go into a role as an associate and an intern and an analyst who's been there for 2-3 years can do way more for the team than I can, and I'm out there instructing them to do things that I can't, right? So the challenge is trying to make sure, one, you understand things quite quickly, you get up to speed, and you gain their respect. Like if this guy asks me to do something, or if we're working with him, he knows exactly what he's doing. And then the next challenge is trying to make sure that the people above you, like the seniors, the directors, know that Ian is there. And it means, look, he's kind of got attention to detail. He knows what he's talking about. He's picked it up. He's consulted, and he's giving me a piece of work that has added some value to him. And once you kind of structure yourself and your career, especially I think your career, and even more so to your kind of personal life, it becomes a bit easier. It becomes a bit easier to have those conversations, and also it becomes a bit easier to stay in the job for long hours, because I'm not really that fussed about the hours per se as a count time. I'm more interested in, well, am I doing the level best, right? If I give this piece of work is a representation of who I am, and if I'm able to do that, then the work becomes a bit more interesting and I'm able to kind of sustain it. That being said, yes, the hours are a bit long, and it's about trying to getting to a point where you're comfortable with healthy boundaries, right? There's sometimes maybe I miss something, but then there are other things I'll make sure I communicate that I have to be there, and people are a bit understanding of it. At the end of the day, you are working with other people.
Yeah. No, I totally agree. Look at your career over a lifetime and try to find that work-life balance as opposed to trying to find it on an individual day. I did say 3 more questions. We might have 1 more and then go to Q&A if that's okay with everybody. But I think it's critical to end on this question. Just given where we are today, as a financial service industry, we are trying to change the DNA and the makeup and the diversity of our workforce, right? So that there's more black representation at all levels across the board. But we're still not there. So Chantel, just with your seat, with your experience, what would you say are some of the best things that Morgan Stanley are doing in order to try and address that disparity that exists?
Absolutely. I think one of the good things that we are doing is sponsoring events like this. We recognize that we are not able to do it on our own, so we need firms like BYP and their expertise and their communities to be able to sort of expand our reach and explain what we do and sort of talk about our culture. So I'm hoping that Morgan Stanley keeps sort of partnering with firms like BYP, because it's key to our success in terms of recruitment. I think one of the things that we are trying to sort of address is that every firm can hire more black people, right? They're out there, they're working, we can all hire, but if they come into a culture where they don't feel welcome, and they don't feel accepted and don't feel like they can be themselves, they're gonna leave and they're gonna go to the next house. So we really are focusing on our retention efforts and what we are doing to sort of really look after the staff that we already have in the firm and promote them. So there's a plethora of activities. I could probably spend 45 minutes just talking about that. But one of the things that I wanted to flag was the formation of the Black Professionals Forum within Morgan Stanley. Every 2 years, we do an engagement survey with our entire global population. And some of the results of that were that this subsection of our population, so the black, what we call non-officers, so the more junior sort of individuals, were feeling like they weren't sort of being heard and didn't have access to leadership, etc. So senior leadership sort of took these results away and said, well, how can we cater for that? What can we do? How can we give them the tools to drive their own success? So spawned from this was formed the Black Professionals Forum, of which Kume and I sit on the steering committee. And the purpose is really to sort of create a community that is coming under the umbrella, sort of the leadership of our African and Caribbean Business Alliance, but it's really catered towards the need of those that are maybe a little bit earlier on in their careers, and sort of asking ourselves, what can we do for this population? So access to senior leadership was a big thing across the board. And we've had the opportunity to speak to sort of individuals within the firm that we would never sort of have access to on a daily basis. We're sort of working with our African Caribbean Alliance to talk to our CEO at the end of the month, which is a bit daunting, but she's a person and she wants to hear from us, which is great. And I think understanding that your firm wants to hear about what concerns you has been a real sort of game changer at Morgan Stanley, and people are feeling like they have avenues to voice their opinions and sort of make sure that their story can be told and that their concerns can be addressed. We have a number of development programs, I'm sure a lot of firms do, sort of talent development programs, which sort of try and target individuals at certain key points in their careers to make sure they have all the tools outside of sort of the technical tools that they need on a daily basis, but all the tools to set them up for success and take them on to the next career. I've been on one, I think Kume, you've been on one, Jordan, I'm sure you've been on a number. But they really are sort of geared towards some of the softer skills that you might need in terms of getting yourself up to the next level. So there's a lot of investment around sort of things like that, but also senior level engagement. We have so many business heads, what we call a European Operating Committee, that are really interested on a granular level about what we have to say and sort of what they can do, what they can personally take accountability for to drive change. And I think that's been the real winner at Morgan Stanley.
So I promised some time for Q&A, so we're going to stick to that. Any questions from the audience?
All right. Thank you, guys. You answered quite a lot of these already, but I'll address the top rated. So Morgan Stanley and a lot of like finance environments are known for having a stuffy corporate environment. And could you speak a bit more about your experience, if that's true or relevant?
It's the tire that gave it away, yeah. Who would like to take that?
Yeah, I can. Yeah, in some ways, there are some bits that are a bit set up in a way that would be a bit infuriating, especially when we're used to a very fast-paced. But a bit of that is just to do with kind of structure and regulation, and things have to be set up in a certain way. And everyone has to make sure that they're careful and they're complying with all the laws and regulation. But we also have teams which are separate, right? And it's a bit of a subculture within teams, and some teams feel very much, I want to say startup-y, but like they feel like, you know, you're open. It's an open door policy. You can have a conversation. You meet every time, and you can share your kind of frustration. You can share what's going well. So in that ways, I felt relieved, because I think I was fortunate enough to be in a team where it didn't really matter too much about bureaucracy, but it was just a case of, you know, what gets the job done quickest and most efficient.
We have here a question directly for Taiwo. How can I, as a business owner, access the capital and help available by the inclusive ventures?
Fair question.
I respect it. If you go to www.morganstanley.com/msivl, that will take you to our website, and you can read more about us there. And if you scroll to the bottom, you can sign up to our newsletter.
All right, I hope that answered your question. And just a last one before we wrapped up. It was mentioned that experience in the finance sector is not necessary for a career at Morgan Stanley. What steps would you advise for someone who wants to transition from the public sector?
Apply for the MSEPP program, the Experienced Professional program. And in all honesty, I think that will give you the best platform and the tools to be able to succeed. It's not just you do the application process and then you're thrown into your desk day one. You go through extensive training, you're given the tools to sort of make sure that you can actually perform on the role. But look, I think a lot of the roles that we recruit for at Morgan Stanley, we try and think sort of broader in terms of what are the actual skills that you need to have, rather than what's the experience necessarily that you've got. So if you've got that technical element, if you've got that accounting background, you can transition that into a number of different roles. So I would definitely think about the actual activity that is required within the role and what activity you're currently doing that can exhibit those qualities, and make sure you bring that out in the application process.
Okay, thank you so much. And just a final question, this is for Jordan. What are the key components to build a strong platform in order to progress strategically in your career?
So at Morgan Stanley, we have this concept of the 4 Ps, right? First is platform. So is your role large enough for you to be promoted to the next level? Do you have enough scope? Is it regional based? Is it global based? Then you've got profile. in terms of what Chantal was talking about, networking, being engaged and integrating yourself in the firm's culture, that's how you build your profile. That's how people are aware of you outside of your day-to-day role. Then you've got performance, and I think that goes without saying, you need to perform in your role. If you're not performing in your role, the way I look at it, performance in your role is the bare minimum expectation. So performance, platform, profile, and the last one is potential. If you are serious about making it to that next level or taking on that next opportunity, don't be short-sighted and just think about that role. People are looking to see if, okay, you can make VP, but what happens when you start competing with those VPs that are due to make ED? Do they see you as an ED when you're even being considered for promotion to VP? So I'd say a combination of those, which we use at our firm, but is applicable wherever you are. And just in closing, what I would love to say is that the only reason I sit in this seat today is because of the steps that I took maybe 10, 15 years ago. Now, that might have been a fairly well-trodden path of A-levels, university, get onto a grad program. But in order to sit in the seat that I want to in 15 years' time, that path isn't as well-trodden. And so it's sessions like this, it's little bits of nuggets of knowledge that you pick up that will allow you to lay those foundations. But that only starts with being intentional about your career.
Can I just add one point to what you just said about platform? I think the real key about that as well is you've got to ask the question. In the theme of being intentional, you can sit down and do your day job and think, well, obviously the next step is vice president, for example, but unless you know exactly what you need to do to get to that level, you and your manager might not be sort of on the same sort of trajectory in terms of thought. So for me, I was in a role where I thought, yeah, well, next level is vice president, obviously I'm gonna get it. And actually, I asked my manager, I was like, do I have the platform to do it? And we had a candid conversation about it, and we talked about my remit. I took on expanded remit to make sure I had that platform. But if I hadn't have asked that question, we both would have just sort of been going along as normal. So again, in terms of being intentional, you've got to ask the question because no one cares about your career as much as you do.
Yeah. Are there any other closing comments from anybody on the panel? Just a quick nugget of knowledge to leave the audience with?
Nothing different except the same thing that we said at the start, your career is yours. Yeah. We can say everything that, we want to say, but at the end of the day, it's how you sort of take that and translate that. So that's all I have to say, it's your career.
Yeah, and just to remember, like you said, it is yours, so keep yourself at the forefront of any decision that you make about your career.
I think it's just remember to take as much responsibility as you can, as early on as you can in your career, whatever you do. And hopefully, as you said, broadens out your capacity in the future and options later.
So take responsibility, and that starts with coming to visit the Morgan Stanley booth or having a look on the website. Thank you very much for